Welcome to today's episode of the Medical Device Marketing Podcast. So today I'm joined by Justin Hall. Welcome.
Thank you. Good to meet you.
Good to meet you too. We're talking about why sales marketing and market access really need to change in today's medical device world. So first of all, Justin, for anybody who doesn't know you, can I ask you to introduce yourself?
Sure. I've been around med devices now for around 21 years. Previous to that, I was an engineer, so I have quite a technical background. I fell into med devices by mistake, by following an engineering route, and I ended up in complex disruptive technology. So I've really stayed at, if you like, the more disruptive end of the market. I spent close to 10 years in startup after a corporate career. So I've traveled globally, worked globally, and I've worked from product management, marketing, and to full commercial teams, including clinical, regulatory, and the full gamut as a general manager, really.
And are there any companies in your past that people listening to this podcast might know?
Yeah, definitely. I started my career in Stryker, a well-known corporate. I moved into Carl Storz, and from that position, I went into startups. So a couple of those that maybe are known are NeoTract, now with Teleflex, and then recently iRhythm. And then I moved on and started my own consultancy to help people commercialize.
So we're here to talk about how market access, sales and marketing is really changing in today's world. So what's brought this about? Because obviously we've had COVID and many other things past that as well. So what do you feel has really changed in medical device marketing that's more difficult now than it was before?
Well, I think definitely the pandemic was a catalyst for huge change. But I think trending really was just noise. You know, the sheer saturation of media, social or otherwise, has been really a fundamental changing point. I think also in MedTech in particular, the regulation has been an underpinning change in that I think marketing teams are more afraid. I think companies are much more risk adverse, especially with patient-focused devices. And that really has underpinned the need for change because you have to be really careful about what you say, but you have to say something. And I think it's difficult to strike a really good balance about what you say and what you do, but it kind of ties towards a general noise increase. It's very difficult to be heard in the market nowadays.
Just because you've got noise across email, social media, every single platform.
Yeah, and I think also your customer, if you want to talk about your end user, is also in the same position that we are as consumers. It's a consumer world. We are trying our best to filter out so much on a daily basis before we even get to work. That actually our customers are in the same position. We've got to remember that. And they're being battered by everybody to try and get their attention in med device as well.
So that's really a marketing angle. How can we change that? Because I agree with you. So we see this. And actually everybody who's listening will probably see as well, like, you know, their LinkedIn boxes are filled with new messages. My emails, I probably get 100 emails a day, which get filtered off into the non-focused box. So yeah, I'm continually getting communications all the time. I'm even starting to get SMSs all the time as well. So really, there is noise in every direction. How do we get over that? Because, you know, we're seeing things are really having to change because you can't keep doing the same old, same old. You know, what are you seeing?
Well, I see hyper-personalisation as being a kind of fundamental point now. I get the same as you do. I get things that just are not relevant for me, which tells me they haven't done the homework around who they're targeting. And then I know we're probably going to go into the subject of AI at some stage, but just the sheer volume now of non-personal AI-generated content that's coming through that is not even relevant or not even, appropriate. It puts people in a mindset where they don't want to answer anything. And I think just becomes a perpetual extra task to filter things out.
So talking about hyper-personalisation, because I agree, I'm hearing this word all the time. We're talking about it all the time, and it actually just fits really well. Like it's the good word. How do you sort of see hyper-personalisation?
Well, I think it starts with targeting, and intelligence, market intelligence, understanding who you're trying to speak to and what you're trying to say, what's relevant to them. So to personalize your message, you have to know your customer really well, and you have to target your message, and it needs to make sense to your customer. It needs to be able to stop them doing these crazy tasks they're now doing and sit up and listen to what you've got to say. That's point one. So if you feel like you're being spoke to as a human being and it's not automated, then you're more likely to take notice of that particular communication.
Have you got any examples? Because, we all get all these messages every day. Have you got any examples where somebody did break through the noise?
Yeah, I'd say somebody who really understands the challenges. I mean, I get thousands of, target acquisition emails, which are buy this list is relevant to you. And it's not. When someone says, I know your space, this is what you're trying to achieve, here's how I can help you. In lead generation is probably at the front of this now. It's the busiest, but I think the most evolved. That speaks to me. It says, I know you're in this space. You need to get to these type of people. I've done my research. But anyone who's trying to sell to me, if you like, or market to me, and they don't understand my space or they made some assumptions, it's an immediate delete.
So when we're talking about hyper-personalisation, it's really not just changing words on your website. It's not, because now, with things like HubSpot and all different platforms, you can set it up so that when somebody now comes onto your website, it says, hello, Claudia, or something like that, or when you're sending emails out, it can say, hi, Claudia, and it automatically runs out all these emails. That's not what we're talking about when we talk about hyper-personalisation. It's really actually like understanding your customer and writing a personalized message to each person. Totally. And actually there's a risk. So that's I think that's definitely where the future is going. But I think AI is saying that it can do it at the moment. What's your experience been of that so far? Because I think it's really enticing in the sense, we're all so busy these days. And actually, if we can get AI to write everything for us, and it's going to be hyper-personalized and bring it back to us, that sounds amazing. What's been your experience of that so far?
Well, I've been fortunate enough to lead a company that brought one of the first large language models into med devices with iRhythm. And what I say is there's a massive overuse of the term AI. A lot of what these technologies are automators, or, if you want, chatbots. There's a very big difference between integrated generative AI and just automated text, if you like. So my question is, what are you asking me about AI? It's a very complex and broad topic. And I think there's a massive overuse of it. If it was classified appropriately, you'd know what you were using. But I think there's great value in automation. There's great value in the structuring of AI.
But automation is not hyper-personalization.
It really isn't. It's the opposite direction.
Yeah.
And I think that's why we're getting so much volume of text that just isn't relevant. And you can see an AI-generated text a mile away. It's American English.
We should have a look at this. It's so true, because we work with AI an awful lot, and all these little things, they send me through the roof. So it's things like, exactly as you say, the Americanisms, hyphens are now the new thing that are everywhere. It's the over-the-top language. You can delve, that's a word that seems to come up an awful lot. Is interesting. Revolutionize. Yeah, horizon, all these things. Yeah.
Well, I think it's a very valuable tool, and the way that it moves forward is on the end of a very experienced marketeer with extreme creativity. You've got an incredible tool that really does save time, because it's very good at structuring content. It's very good at, calling out the problem and putting that in a logical order. It is very good at that at this stage, and it will change. But where it's going to be the most powerful is when it cuts down the really long tasks. And I think that's those who've grasped it now and really understand it at this stage before it evolves further, know where they can use it and know where they can't. But to stand out in a world that's throwing even more content at the wall, the personalization comes to really understanding. I think maybe the segmentation becomes a much more important thing. Not that it wasn't before, but I think we haven't done a good job of market intelligence and segmentation in medical devices generally.
I'll come back to that in a second. Coming back to hyper-personalization, I know segmentation is a part of that. We were talking about if AI can actually, have you seen any good AIs yet that do hyper-personalization? So actually have you received any messages? I suppose you wouldn't know. If it was really good at it, you wouldn't know. But have you seen any AI yet that actually is good at hyper-personalization? Or in order for marketers to really do this well, they're going to have to put the legwork in.
Yeah, I think it bolts onto what you're already doing. So I don't recall a specific scenario recently. It's been more the other way, where I get an increased amount of unsolicited content for one, but content that just isn't relevant. And I know it's generated by AI because of the way it's written. But I do see examples of marketing agencies, I think, potentially calling it ethical AI. Here's something I've noticed: marketing teams talking about ethical AI used in the right way. But I don't see anything breaking through right now in my sphere that's really standing out, which tells me, we haven't quite got it right, but it needs to be utilized by marketing teams in the best effective way. You've still got to apply your strategy to it. You've still got to apply your content management regime. All it can do is execute that for you. You can't write great content if there's no creativity behind it. So it's got to be steered. That's the key to.
So you have to be an expert in what you're doing, and then you use AI to do it faster.
Yeah, and you use, certain methodologies of prompting, in my experience, have been the way to get that, into a more creative and impactful way. So if you were to prompt AI to say, act like a seasoned marketeer, here are all the demographics of my target, and you'd really delve deep into your description, then you get a much more effective feedback from it. But that's a specialist skill. And I think people are dabbling right now. They don't understand the depth of creating a chat GPT or other that is really detailed enough to understand demographics. But if you put the time in, you definitely get the results back.
Is there any really cool tips you could give to people listening about how they could get up to speed faster with AI? Like, is there a really good prompt you use on a daily basis that you'd be like, this is a killer? When I realized this, it just changed how I use ChatGPT. I've got one, which is why I'm interested in what you say.
I think act like,
Yeah.
and I think also AI is becoming, the answers are becoming lazy as more people use it. So there's a lot more content which has already been tried. If you personalize it more, act like and your prompt is much more detailed. Act like a world-class marketeer in a top agency who is pitching to a customer, which is.
So it's keep it really, really specific is what you're saying. So make sure you can actually picture the exact person that you want this chatbot to be or ChatGPT to be, and then you'll get much better results from it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. So my one, we actually have a GPT that programs GPTs. So actually that changed how we did things because it actually asks us questions about what the GPT should do, and then it formats it in a way that the GPT understands, and it saved us so much time because then it gave us all that specificity, which was really interesting. So, but I think it's a fantastic tool. Like I think our lives would be very different without it now.
But don't you think it brings you back to the basics of marketing? Is what you're trying to achieve?
Yeah, and I also think it does, and I think it also, if you don't, I think the big problem with AI is if you don't know what excellent looks like, you're going to go down a whole wrong road, because ChatGPT is amazing, or AI is amazing, but you've got to know that the output, what excellent looks like at the end. And I think often, you'll get it to 90%, and you always have to iterate it at the end to get it to where you want it to be. But it gives you all that like thinking time back, and it really helps you to develop that sort of direction of where you're going.
Yeah, I think they've all got different flavors as well. I think ChatGPT is incredibly good at structuring. It's good, you can build GPT around it. DeepSeek seems to be, in my experience, better at detail of numbers.
We've not used that yet.
I mean, it's difficult to get access to everything that's out there or train on it, but it's if you stay within the top 5, I think mostly things that are integrated with Microsoft are going to, see a lot more use because, and that in turn is going to generate more content because it's, building a bigger engine. So it's really about usage. Where everybody goes, the detail flows. So I think you should try as many as you can that are mainstream. And when you're learning, you need to put a bit of effort into it. It's not an easy thing.
Yeah.
Like any tool, you've
Yeah.
got to understand the good and bad of it. And you should always double check figures, facts.
Totally.
And things that are scraped off the web are very dangerous anyway, aren't they?
But it does give you a good base to start off with.
It's fantastic at structuring, and planning and articulating what you're trying to do. It's good for, kind of a sparring partner for content if you want to check against things.
So ChatGPT. So what we're sort of saying when we're looking at AI, so we're saying the bad side of AI is that we're seeing an awful lot of unpersonalized content coming out, which is causing all this noise in the market, which means that it's getting harder and harder to get through to people. The good side of it is actually when we use it correctly, it can make our jobs much more efficient, much quicker, and actually probably give us some really cool ideas that we never thought of before. So actually when used correctly, it can really give us really great ideas. But we've still got this noisy market. We need to get to hyper-personalisation. So you spoke about segmentation. Let's talk more about segmentation and why it's so important moving forward in what we're doing now.
I think it's really about relevance. So if you're trying to influence, if you like, or educate somebody in a certain space, you have to understand what they're doing. It's very difficult to do that without deep intelligence and research. So I think, the tools that we've used primarily in marketing and MedTech before, email lists, some form of information, LinkedIn, have been quite superficial. So if you have the ability to spend the time researching or buying information, which has been the standard model before, you still only got some part. I think what we've now got is a moving feast of job titles and roles, especially with tech. Yeah, I talk about the NHS in particular. The amount of movement in job roles in the last kind of 18 months to 3 years has made most of those databases semi-irrelevant because they're just not where they used to be, some of these people. And now with the advent of NHS England disbanding, whatever that new form is going to be, the people you're trying to contact are moving. So intelligence still becomes the number one baseline for aiming your story, your strategy, really. That's not going to change. Who are we speaking to? What is it we're trying to say? What do they care about in particular? I'm saving you a ton of money in this particular area. That's great, but we make our money from doing this certain procedure. It's understanding, what the impact might be of your particular product. And I think we go straight to the selling without really understanding, what happens if we bring that product in, especially in disruptive tech.
So like nowadays, so people who listen to the podcast, how do you actually do that? If you need to go and really start understanding your customers so that you can grab their attention over email, be the one person that can grab their attention, and then actually get a meeting, how do we do all that deep research now?
Well, I think, a lot of this is replacing the face-to-face meetings we used to have. You've got to be more present at congresses now that, you don't get away with that part of it. That's the only way to see people, really. If you're lucky enough to have a product that's, in surgery, then you've got more chance of seeing a customer, meeting them. But you are seeing a customer much less now than you used to. But, that feedback you get from a customer is what builds your intelligence in the market. You're saying, this is what we think, and they're saying, well, that's totally not right because we just changed all that within our hospital, for example. So that, how do you get to those face-to-face meetings is becoming the crux of it. You've got to have a valid reason. You've got to know what the problems are, and you've got to do deep research to understand policy, how that's changing, local policy within hospitals, for example.
And that's yes, and local policy in hospitals, you can find all this information out. Like most of the information, it's all public information. Exactly. So, actually that's a really great way to find out the challenges that people are having in a particular hospital and then how your technology could potentially address that.
Yeah, I think hospitals are very good at publicizing what their current focus and challenge is. I talk about some of the tools that are now available that weren't available when I ran these companies. Certainly Hepisodes is something that stuck out to me lately. I thought, wow, that's something I could really done with back in the day because it frames the story for you.
So for anybody who doesn't know what Hepisodes is, could you give a quick explanation about what Hepisodes is?
I wouldn't be doing it justice, but I'll have a shot. I think it just wraps out where procedures are done and in what context, and looks much more at the economic benefit and how to structure your approach to certain problems, but it regionalizes the problems. So there's no point trying to find, let's say, thousands of implants in the Shetland Isles, for example. They just don't do them there in the same volume. So I think it's a great tool to be able to really put out there, where things are happening, what volume it's happening in, and what the current, kind of financial challenge or economic story might be in that area. And it localizes and specifies and personalizes the approach.
And so this allows sales teams to say, actually, this is where the biggest value for my device will be, or the biggest value will be offered. And so then they can actually go to those centers or those hospitals to actually then speak on the same language, in the sense they understand the exact problem that they're going to solve and the volume of the problem they're going to solve as well.
Exactly that. And it's about targeting sales and marketing teams in the right appropriate place with normally limited resources. So there is a habit, I think, of scaling sales teams without really knowing where they're focusing. And there's a bit of farming going on where they go out and look around for business rather than saying, here's where the business is. What tools can we use to really get into this space, this metropolitan area, and focus down on what the problem is and deliver the right appropriate information to have them look at our product and really get that onboarded rather than trying to sell it everywhere.
And this Hepisodes is done or developed by a company called Device Access. So if anybody is interested in looking at Hepisode data, It is done by, so they just get in contact with device access, and it's all personalized to each device. So it's very, a whole process that people would go through.
Yeah, and it's an armamentum of tools that really you should be utilizing amongst your sales, marketing, and generic team to build the proper profiling before you even go anywhere near.
I think that's a great example of market access, because that is where the market access side is, isn't it? So it's more the local market access in the sense you're already in the country, or you already have access, as in national access, but then it's going into all the local trusts to be able to get access into those. What else are you seeing changing in sales teams? Because I think there's huge changes. We see huge changes happening around sales teams. I think it's a very different industry than what it used to be. What are the big changes that you're seeing in sales teams? And because we've spoken most about marketing so far, a little bit with sales when it comes to Hepisode data, but what other challenges are we seeing with sales teams, and what else needs to change to make them really, really effective moving forwards?
As a headline, let's say what needs to change is much deeper integration between all of these factors, these work streams, really. So I kind of look at this like a pit team approach. Kind of Red Bull is a great example. When you incrementally improve every area, you get a greater overall result. So, someone has to be a driver, of course, but without the rest of the team, the driver's going nowhere. And I look at sales potentially as a driver. They used to traditionally hold all the relationships. But I think things are going online now, whereas the customer is choosing to do research first. And so the underlying change would be to integrate much deeper. There's always been a siloed approach between market access, sales, and marketing. Bit of ego in there. I think when you integrate that properly and you really know where you're going, everyone knows their part in the race, the story, you have much better results. So I think sales need to be much more understanding that these aren't separate departments. They are tools for them, that they've got to feed that machine of intelligence, if you like. So sales input their information, marketing input their information, market access, have their intelligence information. And together, all of that is what creates your strategy of approach. That's the bedrock of it all.
One thing that we see that's, because it's everybody involved together, isn't it? And when everybody's involved together, the outcomes are amazing, because everybody has different inputs, as you say. But we find when we map out customer journeys, so we see, right from awareness to consideration to decision to evangelist, like you'll see they're on different channels, obviously, at different points. They have different questions at different points. They have different issues, fears, and concerns at different points. So actually, market access comes in at a certain point during that buyer's journey, once you already have market approval and you're in the market. Marketing, they now say that 80% of a buyer's journey happens before they ever get in contact with a customer. That's marketing. That's all that size, that place there. And then you've got the sales. So actually, it's like when you map out that customer journey, you can see where every section fits together. And only by every section working together do you get to the end point. But I think the really important thing, which you were talking about, sales are with the customers. They know everything about your customers. So actually, all these people now, the 80% of people, or the 80% of the decision process that's happening online, they have the same questions that your sales team are being asked every day. So your sales team are a really good place or really good resource for your marketing team to get the right content. So it's just never, I agree. I think it's never been more important to bring them all together. And the question is, how do you do that? Because I think in big companies, that's really, really challenging. Maybe I don't understand it well enough, but I've never seen that synergy in the way I think it needs to drive really exceptional commercialization is probably what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think you're right. It begins with leadership, really. The responsibilities, tasks, program management, really. And we never looked at that the same way in some companies. I think in med devices, we've always looked at it as this is your function, go and do it. But I think there is a turn, because there's been less influence now at the clinical level. So traditionally, salespeople used to meet with clinical leads. Now you're finding them, at least in my experience, we moved into a commercial discussion, which was involving, let's say, more operational stakeholders. And what's happened is the responsibility for signing things off has gone so far up the chain that you end up having to speak to much more senior stakeholders. And that becomes like a team event. So there's no point having a discussion about healthcare economics if you're a salesperson and it's not your thing. You should bring an expert to do that. So you end up with a team approach towards commercialization, which is, as you said, which questions are going to come up? Do we have the right expert in the room? That's how things move forward. So I think that is happening. The traditional, if you want, the surgical-led decision, it's pretty much deteriorated. Whilst there is still influence there, you have to have that as a marker. Other people make the decisions to sign these off financially, and there's criteria and there's information needs to be passed. And if a sale isn't happening, it's because somebody's got a question to answer or isn't happy about the answer you've given.
Exactly.
And that's what we're not good at, I think, of understanding of why has this stopped? Why has it stalled?
And actually, if you understand why it stopped or stalled at any stage, and you'll probably find there are common reasons all the time why these things stop and stall. You'll probably find is one or two things that's causing it. Yeah, so actually, if you can address that one thing, and it could be an information that's just not provided the right information, but if you can do that and even create content, obviously we do an awful lot of content, that side of things, but if you can create that content, then it helps everybody else move past that point. I mean, that's just a very streamlined way to sort of move things forward.
Well, if we look at the humanity of a sales process, it is semi-linear. I'd say that about the NHS. It can be a bit circular, but eventually there is a process there. When you look behind the curtain enough, you'll see something hasn't been done, a meeting hasn't happened, some information hasn't got to the right place. So you really have to understand what the process is. And we've never been really good at that in med devices until recently, I think. Now we've been forced to understand, why am I getting no responses when I've had this in play for 6 months, for example? Given recent changes, I can understand that. But prior to that, it reminds me of a certain scenario where we thought we had built a business plan that was valuable and had it ripped up in front of me by a GM of a certain hospital because it was not valuable and it wasn't on the documentation that they needed to submit. So I learned a very hard lesson that, we weren't anywhere further forward than I thought we were. I thought we were much further forward than we were. And then I learned what real business planning was and what needed to go into that. And then I learned there was a process behind that which led to a board sign-off. So there's another 5 or 6 steps that seemed invisible before.
So it sounds like what we're saying is that sort of as a summation of what we need to change. So what needs to change in sales, marketing, market access is that actually just everything needs to be mapped out to death up front in so much detail. And it's a breathing and it's a living document. And from every part of your customer's journey, it must be mapped out. And what questions you're going to get, who's going to ask them, do you have the person to answer? Because once you've got that map, you can create all the materials, whether it's marketing, sales, market access, to address every single part of that. And then you'll move through seamlessly. And it's a lot of work. It's a hell of a lot of work.
It is, but I'll tell you who does this. There's nothing worse than waiting a year for something not to happen, and spending that money anyway. But I think software industry do this really well. They have a gating process. They say we don't pass from point A to B until these things are done. And probably some former teammates would be sticking pins in effigy of me when we talk about the process, because we systemized the process in saying that unless these things are done, this is never going to happen. So don't try to go to the next stage until your colleague has, understood this piece or given you information for this piece. The business plan is in play. And that has been, some reason for some of the successes we've had as teams, systemizing the process, logically understanding all the steps that need to happen, and being real with ourselves about having not done that work or not managed to get to the stage we were. And when you've got limited resources in startup, you have to prioritize those things that are going to fly over trying to sell everywhere. And, when you're given a lump of money from the NHS, which has happened in a previous company, you have to put it where it's going to become adopted. So you have to be rigid about what you're going to, how you're going to apply your resources to that as a company. When you systemize and you put it on the table, all teams know where they stand, you'll make progress. When you try to pretend you've got past B when you need to go to C and you haven't,
and in
you're
your
back
mind,
to square one.
And in your mind, you know that you're going to bump into D shortly.
You definitely are. You are. Pain is on the way. It's just a matter of time. So
Yeah.
if you're honest with yourself, there's no point kidding yourself. I worked for some companies that thought just selling was the ultimate and that was it. But ultimately, you come back to the same point. Have you done all the things you need to do to access this market, to help them understand your product, to build your entity and your noise and your, let's say, your voice in the market? Have you done all these things? And are you even in a selling position? Because so many companies just are not in a selling position. they haven't done the groundwork, haven't done, the intelligence piece to be able to put together a proper selling package.
And so when do you think people need to do this level of due diligence? And when you say in the beginning, like when do you mean? Because obviously, so when we look at startups, there's obviously pre-commercial, then you actually go to launch. Thing is, this is an evolving, breathing thing, right, as well?
Yeah. No, it's fair. I mean, there are certain things that you ought to do before you go anywhere near the market, and that is, what is it you do? How do you do it? Who cares about that? That's a tough question to ask yourself. And does your product fit, that particular market? I mean, I say to some companies I advise, is this the market for you? Do you even need to be here? Is there a better place to be in Europe or around the world that's more aligned to your product? And I'll give an example of Germany and outpatient surgery. They're not good at that because guess what? It doesn't pay. If you're bringing a product in that's been done in 6 minutes when they've got a current procedure that takes 2 days and bed stay and they get paid for that, that's why it doesn't fly. So yeah, in the beginning, you could waste millions, and companies have, trying to scale up in countries that don't have a system that works that way. So yeah, in the beginning, as much as you can, and then, your intelligence around your commercialization builds as you learn more. And if your product iterates, then you have to think about it differently before that scenario. I know lots of people will be groaning saying, well, this is the product I got in this market, and that is fair enough. But
you can actually, it's never too late, is it? Because even if you started now, so if you're, even if you're, you've got a product that's been out for 2 years and don't feel you're really segmenting the market enough, you're really not speaking to your customer in the way you should be speaking to them, and you've got blockages and problems, you can start mapping everything out now and actually saying, right, where are all of these touch points and have we covered them? One of the questions, but really, I suppose it's knowing that, like being really comfortable with what you don't know and actually being really curious about that. Because we find that it's like, the more you say, I don't know this, let's go find it out. Then you start growing pulling on threads and growing your map. And then you can be really, really, really effective.
it's a fantastic point. I think, leadership, it's on leadership to say, are we market ready? What do we know? What don't we know? And be honest about that, because you're going to come back to that point anyway. And if you spent another million trying to scale something that's not in a position it needs to be, that money's gone. You won't get that back. And I think you've got to balance expectation, especially the way the investment community is now, balance expectation with your commercial success, because you're going to go around that road anyway. You're just going to burn more cash to get to the same point. So, deepening your knowledge, spending the money on a commercialized integrated approach would definitely be better value for money and better use of hard raised funds than wasting a year getting it wrong. And I speak from some experience there. It's not easy, and I know people are out there doing it, but sometimes the expectation is just too high and the demand is that you just go out there and do it. But, taking a bit of time to really understand what you're trying to do and pulling all that intelligence in is always a good decision.
And actually, I suppose, anybody who is in a business, running a business, you learn so much as you go and you never have all the answers. And, as you just said, I've had some experience of that. I've definitely had some experience of that, that you do trip over things as you go. So, I suppose if it's also getting expertise in potentially to help to do this, who are familiar with doing this all the time, familiar with commercialization frameworks, how to map everything out, how to understand exactly what you do and don't know and where you need to focus next.
I absolutely agree. I mean, through the journey of the last 10 years, I've been fortunate enough to meet some, serious experts out there who do this for a living, the particular section that I'm looking for. I never, I'll give you an example of lobbying. Knew nothing about lobbying. When I ran out of ideas around a certain coding for a certain product, there was nothing left on the table that we knew about. So we went into the political domain and we learned about lobbying, and we understood how we could influence bad decisions made within the health system. And that was the effective, the key, if you like, to the lock that finally changed things. Through one reason or another, he managed to get, politics played a part in understanding why a certain area of medicine wasn't served very well. But then it's often overlooked.
But it sounds like you understood the problem you had and then found somebody who could help you solve that problem. So again, you'd done that due diligence to understand we're going to get blocked here. Let's get somebody to help us unblock that.
Absolutely right. You've got to be honest with yourself and authentic. These are the things that happened. This is what we have to do somehow. What are all the ways in which we can do that? And I remember being there with teams, big whiteboards, cringing about what we knew about the environment, thinking that we should have known more, and we overlook something really obvious. And just taking a 360 view of your entire challenge and the market and the changes and policy is really helpful. You learn so much.
It's really exciting that as well, because if you do it and you sit down and you map everything out and, you then see, right, we do need sales to come in and help marketing here. We do need market access to come in and help. And suddenly you have a plan of how everybody's going to work together. It's like everything comes off this, staying curious all the time and looking at where you don't know. You end up with the whole roadmap of how you're going to move forward.
Absolutely. And there's no secrets to how you're going to move forward as well.
Yeah.
So it certainly helps teams integrate if you're open and transparent about what you know, what you don't know, where you're going.
Yeah.
It's a basis. Yeah.
Yeah. So we've spoken about a lot of different things in today's episode. To bring it all back sort of and summarize it down, what do you think are the biggest things, one for each, like, how marketing's changing, sales are changing, and market access are changing? What companies need to think about? What would you say for marketing to start off with?
But for marketing, it's about, matching that creativity and intelligence with the best tools out there. And there are plenty of tools. You need to do your due diligence on that. But understanding your customer in a much deeper way, where they are, where they're buying. I think that is probably the underpinning factor now. Your customer's changing. Where are they looking? How are they buying? And that is changing radically. On the market access side, I think a lot of things are changing. It's much more of a grey area now. So you've got to understand policy more, what's changing, and maybe the regionalizing of healthcare systems plays a bigger part in, market access. How do I get this funded rather than looking for, a code? It's a different story now, which I think, really leans much more towards health economics and heavy data.
Yeah.
On the commercial front, it's your relationship with certain key stakeholders needs to be broader than it ever used to be. So that is about upskilling and really dropping ego around, control and integrating your colleagues in a much more, I call it a commercialized approach rather than a sales-based approach.
Thank you. That makes an awful lot of sense. So thank you very much for joining today's episode. It was really interesting to speak all about this in an area that I'm so passionate about as well. So thank you very much for your time.
It's my pleasure. It's great.
Thank you everyone for listening to today's episode of the Medical Device Marketing Podcast. We hope it was useful and I hope you have a fantastic day.